We're going to start today with a really telling observation from one of the world's most successful investors. Someone who has seen it all from the absolute top.
And it's quite a line.
It is. The quote is, "What often bothers very wealthy CEOs is that other CEOs are getting even richer. Envy and greed walk hand in hand."
Wow. Just cuts right through, doesn't it? It suggests that, even having billions doesn't fix that very human feeling of competitive jealousy.
Exactly. And it poses this huge central question for us, which is, can that kind of success built on just wanting to one-up the next person, can it ever really lead to fulfillment or, to any real societal benefit?
That's the conflict, isn't that? That's what we're looking at, this tension between leaders who seem to be driven by, well, envy and greed and a completely different way of thinking.
An alternative based on what? Humble self-improvement and just basic human kindness.
Two totally different operating systems for life. Let's start by unpacking that first one, the what we might call the billionaire's verdict.
Right. So let's get into the evidence. This insight that the problem isn't wealth itself, but relative wealth. The fact that someone else is getting even richer.
It feels like it's been amplified, this dynamic of constant comparison.
How so?
Well, you see the envy in how some high-profile figures are just obsessed with their rivals, always criticizing them, always needing to have the higher score.
And that, as the quote says, walks hand in hand with greed.
It does, which is where you get these pushes for just absurd financial packages.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of $1 trillion pay package was floated.
$1 trillion, the number is so wild it barely even feels real.
But it perfectly highlights the point. For these individuals, business, and more public life, it's all just a game.
A zero-sum game.
Exactly. It's not about what we're building together. It's about who has the most points at the end.
So if that's the mindset in the boardroom, this ruthless scorekeeping, how does that then translate into policy and public messaging?
Well, that's where we get to the political arena, where all that self-serving ambition gets repackaged and sold to the public as, economic stewardship.
The shift is almost seamless, isn't it? Which brings us to our second theme, the political playbook. And it really seems to be a strategy built on distraction.
And contradiction. Let's look at the economic messaging. There's a very specific claim that's being made about your purchasing power.
Okay, what's the claim?
The spin is essentially this. Yes, on average, people lost ground to inflation. We know that. But the administration is now saying the gap is closing fast because some of that purchasing power has come back recently.
So it's a very selective use of the numbers.
Highly selective. It's designed to frame the story as one of recovery, even if you, the average person, still feel a whole lot poorer.
And then tied to that, there's a big promise.
A very big promise.
Yeah.
$2,000 rebate or dividend checks for middle and lower income families.
Okay, and how are they proposing to fund this?
Through tariffs. But here's the catch. The amount of income they're claiming from these tariffs is in the trillions of dollars.
Wait, trillions? From tariffs?
I mean, based on global trade, that number seems, let's just say, economically questionable. And this is what makes it all feel like a smoke and mirrors operation.
So the plan seems to be make these huge promises.
And when they don't materialize, which they probably won't, you just blame the other party. Or maybe the Supreme Court. You find a scapegoat.
And to sell this, you need some very specific, very selective data.
Oh, absolutely. We saw them reach for non-official data, even citing a food delivery company, to claim that grocery prices, specifically for breakfast items, have dropped 14%.
That sounds great on the surface.
It does. But you have to see it against the bigger picture of what's been called a K-shaped economy.
Explain that. What's a K-shaped economy?
Well, think of the letter K. The people at the very top, their fortunes are going up. That's the upward stroke. Their stock portfolios are doing great.
But the other line on the K...
The other line is going down. That's everyone else. Middle and lower income folks who are still facing rising costs for housing, for healthcare, for everything essential. So that 14% drop, it might be felt by some, but for most people, it doesn't change the fact that they're sinking.
That kind of disconnect, it just has to lead to political evasion, right?
Inevitably. We saw a key leader get asked about healthcare, about the ACA subsidies, and the response was all about a deliberative process.
Which our analysis said sounded like a
strange used car salesman. It's the language you use when you have no intention of committing to a real plan.
So if the domestic situation is still tough, with high costs for food and healthcare, what's the final move in the playbook?
The ultimate tactic is distraction. You shift the public's focus away from problems at home by creating perpetual war narratives.
You mean pointing to things like naval actions against drug traffickers or escalating tensions somewhere else in the world?
Precisely. You shift the focus outward so no one's scrutinizing the failures at home.
And this win-at-all-costs mindset, it just creates chaos inside the political system itself.
It really does. You see leaders accusing their own allies of having lost her way for asking basic questions. Asking why grocery prices are still high or questioning a bailout for Argentina.
The system just starts to break down.
It splinters because, as the analysis puts it, the leader ends up surrounded only by people who are willing to lie for him. It's about protecting the leader, not finding the truth. The political game becomes a perfect reflection of the boardroom game.
All that political noise, that competitive anxiety, it's just exhausting. It feels like this broken system built on nothing but illusion.
It does. And that's exactly why the material pivots here to something quiet, something much more profound, an entirely different rule book for life.
Which we're calling the golden rule.
Yes. This is where you get this really powerful counter-narrative to that whole culture of competition. The advice is all focused on internal improvement, not external gain.
What really stood out to me was the advice on mistakes. Don't dwell on them. Don't beat yourself up.
Just learn a little something and move on. The message is so simple and powerful. It is never too late to improve.
And a key part of that is to get the right heroes and copy them. It's about being a better version of yourself, not just beating someone else in a race.
And that idea is just perfectly captured in that famous story about Alfred Nobel.
Right. The obituary.
His brother dies, and a newspaper makes a mistake and prints Alfred's own obituary. And he reads it and is just horrified.
Because it described him as a man who only created things that cause violence.
And in that moment, he realized he had to change his entire legacy.
What a wake-up call. It completely reframes what success even means. The advice here is, don't wait for a newsroom mix-up.
No. Decide what you would like your obituary to say and live the life to deserve it.
That just completely turns the definition of greatness we get from that world of envy and greed on its head.
It does. This philosophy says very clearly that greatness is not about piling up money or publicity or political power.
It's an empty game.
A totally empty game. True achievement, according to this way of thinking, comes from something else entirely.
From helping other people.
Yes. The message is just beautiful in its simplicity. Kindness is costless, but also priceless. The ultimate guide for how you should behave is just the golden rule.
It cuts through all the noise, all the scorekeeping.
It brings it all back to basic human connection. The final piece of advice is just a reminder that everyone you meet is a human being, from the cleaning lady to the chairman.
Which is a pretty sharp critique of our modern me culture, where we can so easily disregard the people serving us, the drivers, the waiters.
We see them as obstacles or tools instead of people.
So let's try to bring this all together. We've seen this really stark contrast laid out. On one side, you have this destructive cycle of envy and greed that turns life into a competition.
And fuels all this political distortion. And on the other, you have the long-term fulfillment that comes from applying the golden rule and just trying to be a little better every day.
So you really have to consider the ultimate cost. If the leaders claiming to bring prosperity are really just playing a game to get richer, if that whole pursuit leads to distraction and lying and a failure to address real human needs, what's the cost to your own life if you buy into that game?
The takeaway seems to be that the real power is in choosing the alternative.
Rejecting the competitive anxiety, the me culture. So the final thought is this. What small change in your own perspective, just based on treating others with respect, applying that golden rule, what change could best insulate you from all that cultural toxicity?
Something for you to think about.